A homeless mother inherited a $6 farmhouse. What she discovered hidden in its walls would not only make her rich, it would rewrite her entire life. If you've ever felt lost and wondered if there was a place for you in the world, stick around. Hit that subscribe button because this story is for you. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Tuesdays were gray. Not just the sky, which was the color of dishwater over the city, but the feeling of the day itself. It was the day the shelter did its deep clean, which meant we had to be out of the common room by 8 a.m. and couldn't come back until 5. For me and my 4-year-old son, Leo, that meant 9 hours of navigating a world that wasn't built for us. 9 hours of library story times, long, looping bus rides to stay warm, and the quiet humiliation of nursing a single cup of coffee for 2 hours in a cafe until the manager's stare got too heavy. That Tuesday, I was sitting on a bench in a small, forgotten park, the kind with more pigeons than people. Leo was asleep in his stroller, his small face peaceful, oblivious to the damp chill that was seeping into my bones. My own stomach was a tight knot of cold and hunger. The letter had been given to me that morning by the shelter director, a woman named Maria, whose kindness always felt like it was stretched thin over a deep well of exhaustion. "This came for you, Alara," she'd said, handing me the crisp, official-looking envelope. "Looks important." Everything looked important when you had nothing. I'd been staring at it for an hour, tracing the unfamiliar name of the law firm in the corner. Abernathy & Sons, attorneys at law. The postmark was from a town I'd only ever heard my mother curse under her breath, Blackwood Creek. It was the place she'd run from, the place she swore she'd die before ever seeing again. And she had. She'd died 1,000 miles away, in a city that swallowed her whole, leaving me with nothing but a box of faded photographs and a legacy of flight. My hands trembled as I tore the envelope open. The paper inside was thick, expensive. It felt alien in my calloused fingers. The words were dense with legal jargon I couldn't untangle. Estate of, last will and testament, intestate succession. I scanned the page, my eyes jumping around, looking for a name I recognized. And then I saw it. Eleanor Vance, my grandmother. A woman I knew only as a ghost in my mother's angry stories, the woman who had supposedly cast her own daughter out, leaving her to fend for herself. The letter was from a Mr. James Abernathy, informing me that as the sole surviving heir of Eleanor Vance, I had inherited her property. Lot 7, Blackwood Creek, a farmhouse and 6 acres of land. My breath caught in my throat. A house, land, a home. For a wild, dizzying second, I saw it. A yard for Leo to play in, a roof that didn't have a curfew, a door I could lock myself. Then I read the next line, and the fantasy shattered. Due to significant back taxes and county liens against the property, the estate was declared insolvent. The property itself was appraised at a value of 0, owing to its state of condemnation. A development corporation, Northgate Holdings, had made a standing offer to the county to purchase the land and absorb the debts for the purpose of demolition and redevelopment. Their offer for the deed was $6, $1 for each acre. The letter was a formality. I was being asked to sign away my inheritance for the price of 2 cups of coffee, just to clear the title so the bulldozers could move in. $6. It wasn't an inheritance, it was an insult. A final joke from a grandmother I'd never met. I crumpled the letter in my fist, the thick paper resisting, a knot of rage and grief tightening in my chest. Of course this was how it would be. A ghost of a home, a whisper of hope, snatched away before I could even taste it. Leo stirred in his stroller, his small hand reaching out for me in his sleep. I took his hand, his warmth a tiny anchor in the cold, gray Tuesday. What was I supposed to do? Take the $6? It would buy us a hot meal. It would be the smart thing to do. My mother would have taken the money. She would have laughed her bitter laugh and said, "See? I told you there was nothing for us there." But as I looked at my sleeping son, a different thought, quiet and stubborn, took root in my mind. What if she was wrong? The bus ride to Blackwood Creek was like traveling backward in time. With every mile that pulled us away from the city's concrete skyline, the world outside the smeared window grew greener, wilder. We passed skeletal strip malls, then sprawling suburbs, then finally, nothing but rolling hills and wide-open fields, stitched together with dark lines of trees. Leo, who had spent his entire life in a landscape of brick and asphalt, was mesmerized. He pressed his face against the glass, his breath fogging a small circle. "Look, Mama," he whispered, his voice full of awe. "So many trees." I had used the last of my emergency cash for the 2 one-way tickets. It was a reckless decision, one that left us with nothing but the clothes on our backs, a diaper bag, and a handful of change. The smart thing would have been to sign the papers Mr. Abernathy had so thoughtfully included in the envelope, mail them back, and wait for my $6 check. But I couldn't. I had to see it. I had to stand on the land that was mine, even if it was only for a day. I had to know what my mother had run from, and what her mother had left behind. Mr. Abernathy's office was on the town's main street, a short, tidy row of brick buildings that looked like they hadn't changed in 50 years. The man himself was just as timeless. He was older, with kind, tired eyes, and a suit that was probably fashionable when my grandmother was a young woman. His office smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and something else. Maybe rain. He didn't seem surprised to see me, just sighed softly as he ushered me and a restless Leo into his office. "I had a feeling you might come," he said, gesturing for us to sit in the 2 worn leather chairs facing his massive oak desk. "You have your grandmother's eyes." I didn't know what to say to that. I'd always been told I had my mother's eyes. He got straight to the point, laying out the situation in a calm, pragmatic voice that left no room for hope. The back taxes were substantial, over $10,000. The house had been officially condemned by the county 2 years ago after a storm took off half the roof. It was a liability, not an asset. "Northgate Holdings has been trying to acquire that parcel for years," he explained, folding his hands on the desk. "It's the last private holdout in a tract they want for a new luxury housing development. They'll pay the taxes, handle the demolition. The $6 is a formality. Frankly, Ms. Vance, it's the only offer you're ever likely to get." "My name is Alara," I said quietly. Ms. Vance was my grandmother. He nodded, a flicker of something, pity, maybe, in his eyes. "Alara, your grandmother was a client of my father's, and then mine, for over 60 years. She was a very determined woman." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She loved that farm. She fought to keep it until the very end. I think she would be sad to see it go, but she was also a realist. She would want you to do what's best for your son." He glanced at Leo, who was now quietly trying to scale a bookshelf. The implication was clear. What was best for my son was $6 and a clean break. "I want to see it," I said, the words feeling bolder than I felt. "Before I sign anything, I need to see the house." Mr. Abernathy sighed again, a sound of weary resignation. "Of course, it's your right. But I must advise you, the property is not safe. The structure is unstable. Don't go inside if you can help it." He drew a small, simple map on a piece of notepad paper. "It's about 3 miles out of town. The road's not marked well anymore. Look for a collapsed stone wall and a mailbox with a faded V on it. That's the place." He handed me the map and a pen. "When you've seen enough, you can sign the transfer deed and leave it in my mail slot. I'll see that the check is forwarded to you, wherever you end up." Wherever you end up. The words hung in the air, a stark reminder of my reality. I had nowhere to go. We were standing at the edge of a cliff, and this strange, sad inheritance was the only thing breaking our fall. I thanked him, bundled a now fussy Leo into his stroller, and walked out of the quiet, paper-scented office into the bright, unfamiliar afternoon. The 3-mile walk felt like a pilgrimage. The road quickly turned from cracked pavement to gravel, and the air grew thick with the smell of damp earth and pine. It was quiet, so quiet. No sirens, no traffic, just the crunch of my worn-out sneakers on the road and the chirping of birds I couldn't name. We found it just as the sun was beginning to dip below the tree line, painting the sky in shades of orange and bruised purple. The stone wall had mostly crumbled back into the earth, and the mailbox was leaning sideways, the V almost completely erased by rust and time. I pushed the stroller through a gap in the wall, and there it was, my grandmother's house. Mr. Abernathy's warning hadn't prepared me. It wasn't just a house, it was a skeleton. A 2-story farmhouse, once probably white, now stripped to gray, weathered wood. The roof on the right side was gone, leaving the upstairs rooms exposed to the sky like an open wound. Windows were dark, empty sockets, shattered or boarded up. The porch sagged so dramatically in the middle, it looked like it was kneeling in defeat. The whole place was being swallowed by nature. Vines crawled up the walls, and the yard was a jungle of weeds and saplings. It was worse than I could have imagined. It was hopeless. I stood there, holding the handle of Leo's stroller, and for the first time since I'd gotten the letter, I felt the full weight of my foolishness. I had dragged my son across the state, spent our last dollar, chasing a fantasy. And for what? This ruin, this monument to failure. My mother was right. There was nothing here for us. I sank to the ground, the damp grass soaking through my jeans, and I cried. I cried for my mother, for the hardship she endured. I cried for the grandmother I never knew, who died alone in this broken place. And I cried for myself and for Leo, for our endless, homeless wandering. "Mama, sad?" Leo's small voice broke through my despair. He had climbed out of his stroller and was standing beside me, his hand on my shoulder. His eyes were wide with a concern that was far too old for a 4-year-old. I wiped my face and pulled him into my lap, holding him tight. "Yeah, baby. Mama's a little sad, but we're okay." But were we? The air was getting colder. We couldn't stay here. My plan, if you could call it that, had been to see the house, sign the papers, and then… what? Try to hitchhike back to the city? Beg for a ticket at the bus station? I had no idea. I had acted on a single, desperate impulse, and it had led us to this dead end. As I held Leo, my gaze drifted back to the house. It was a wreck, a total loss. But even in its decay, there was a strange sort of dignity to it. The foundation was stone, solid and square. The lines of the house, where they were still visible, were simple and strong. It had been built to last. It had just been let go for too long. Against Mr. Abernathy's advice, against my own better judgment, I knew I had to go inside. I couldn't leave without setting foot in the place where my grandmother had lived and died. I left Leo safely in his stroller, a good distance away, promising him I'd be right back. The porch steps groaned under my weight, but they held. The front door was gone, leaving a dark, gaping hole. I stepped through it, into the gloom. The air inside was thick and musty, the smell of rot and rain and trapped time. Dust motes danced in the slanted beams of evening light that pierced through the holes in the roof. The floor was a minefield of fallen plaster, broken glass, and animal droppings. In the living room, a sofa's springs had exploded from its moldy upholstery. A brick fireplace stood against one wall, its mantelpiece still holding a single soot-stained candlestick. I moved slowly, carefully, from room to room. The kitchen was the worst. The floor had partially collapsed into the cellar, and the ceiling above was a lattice of splintered wood. And yet, I could almost see it. I could almost imagine a woman, my grandmother, standing at the rusted sink, looking out the window at the fields. I could almost hear the echo of a life lived here. It felt less like a house and more like a tomb. A tomb for a life I knew nothing about. Upstairs was too dangerous to explore. I stood at the bottom of the staircase, looking up into the darkness. This was it. There was nothing here. No hidden treasures, no secret heirlooms. Just decay, just loss. Defeated, I turned to leave. As I stepped back into the main room, my foot caught on a loose floorboard. I stumbled, catching myself on the wall. Cursing my clumsiness, I looked down. The board was sticking up at a strange angle. It wasn't rotten like the others. It looked like it had been pried up and put back, but not properly. Curiosity, the last ember of my failed hope, flickered. I knelt down, my knees protesting against the rough floor. I worked my fingers under the edge of the board. It was heavy, made of solid oak, but it came up easily. Underneath, in the dark, dusty space between the floor joists, was a small metal box. It was an old ammunition box, painted army green, with a heavy latch on the front. It was heavy. My heart started hammering against my ribs. I lifted it out. It was cold to the touch. I fumbled with the latch, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. It clicked open. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like yellowed newspaper, was not money, not jewelry, but a stack of envelopes tied together with a faded blue ribbon. And on top of the stack, a single, small, leather-bound journal. I opened the journal. The first page had a name written in elegant, looping cursive. Eleanor Vance. And below it, a date from 40 years ago. This was my grandmother's. This was her story. The sun had nearly set, and a deep twilight was settling over the ruined farm. I carried the metal box outside and sat on the ground beside Leo's stroller, my back against a sturdy old oak tree. He was awake now, watching me with wide, curious eyes. I untied the blue ribbon, my hands shaking so much I could barely manage the knot. The envelopes were brittle with age, the handwriting on them faded but still legible. They were letters. Letters written by my grandmother, Eleanor, to my mother, Sarah. Dozens of them. All of them marked, "Return to sender." My mother had never opened them. She'd never even received them. She must have moved so often, so quickly, that the post office could never find her. My grandmother had kept every single one. I opened the first one, dated a week after my mother would have turned 16. My hands trembled as I read the elegant, looping script. "My dearest Sarah," it began. "Another week has passed, and my heart aches with the silence. I hope this letter finds you well and safe. I pray for it every night. I know you are angry, my love. I know you feel that I have abandoned you, sent you away. I need you to know, with every fiber of my being, that I did it to protect you." My breath hitched. Protect her? My mother's story was always the same. Her own mother, a cold and unforgiving woman, had thrown her out at 16 for some minor teenage rebellion. She'd put her on a bus with $20 and told her never to come back. That story was the foundation of my own life, the explanation for our rootlessness, our poverty, our perpetual state of running. I read on, the words blurring through my tears. My grandmother wrote about a man, a neighbor, whose sons had started causing trouble. They were dangerous, violent. They had cornered my mother one night on her way home. Nothing happened, but it was close. Too close. My grandmother, a widow alone on the farm, had gone to the sheriff, but he was useless, related to the man by marriage. She realized she couldn't protect her daughter. Sending her away to live with a distant cousin in the city wasn't a punishment. It was an act of desperate, terrified love. I picked up another letter, and another. A story unfolded that was the complete opposite of the one I'd been told. My grandmother had sent money every month, money she earned from selling vegetables and eggs at the market. She wrote about the farm, about fixing the tractor, about a sick cow, about the loneliness that was a constant, heavy presence in the house without my mother's laughter. She wrote about her pride in hearing, through the cousin, that my mother had finished high school. She begged her to write back, to just let her know she was safe. But she never did. My mother, consumed by her own story of betrayal, had cut herself off completely. She had built a wall of anger around her heart, and she never let anyone, not even the truth, tear it down. I sat there in the gathering dark, the letters spread around me, and I wept. But these were different tears. They were tears of grief for a grandmother I had been taught to hate, a woman of incredible strength and quiet sacrifice. They were tears of anger at my own mother, for the lie she had lived, a lie that had starved us both of a family, of a home. And they were tears of a profound, shattering release. The story of my life, the one where I was the unwanted daughter of an unwanted daughter, was not true. I came from a line of fierce, loving women. I came from this place. This broken, beautiful place. The journal was different. It wasn't letters, but records. Dates, names, figures. It took me a while to understand what I was looking at. They were notes. Geological surveys. My grandmother, it turned out, wasn't just a farmer. She had taken geology courses at the local community college for years. She had spent decades studying the land, her land. She wrote about rock formations, about water tables, about shale deposits. Tucked into the back of the journal were official-looking documents, assay reports from the 1970s, correspondence with the state geological department, and a registered deed, a mineral rights deed. It stated, in clear, legal language, that Eleanor Vance was the sole owner of all subterranean mineral and water rights for her 6-acre parcel and, crucially, for the 300 acres of surrounding state-owned land that she had leased for grazing decades ago, a lease that had never expired. That was it. That was what Northgate Holdings wanted. It wasn't the 6 acres of surface land for their tacky McMansions. It was what was underneath. My grandmother had discovered something valuable deep in the earth. Natural gas, a rare mineral, an aquifer, and she had legally protected it. Northgate knew. They must have known. Their plan was to acquire the land for nothing, extinguish the old deed by absorbing the property into a new development, and take control of the rights worth, potentially, millions. They were counting on her heir being ignorant. They were counting on me being desperate. They were counting on me taking the $6. A cold, hard fury replaced my grief. They had preyed on my grandmother's poverty, waiting for her to die. And now they were preying on mine. I looked at the crumbling house, no longer seeing a ruin, but a fortress, a legacy of defiance. This wasn't just a property, it was a testament. My grandmother had held on, fighting for this land, not just for herself, but for a future she hoped her daughter and her daughter's daughter would one day claim. She had hidden the proof, the truth, in the floor, waiting for me. The decision was instantaneous. It wasn't even a choice. It was a claiming. I was not selling. I was not running. My mother had run her whole life, and it had led us to shelters and park benches. I was going to stop running. I was going to stay. I was going to fight. This was my home now. That night was the hardest of my life, and also the most peaceful. I found a section of the porch that was dry and relatively stable. I bundled Leo into every spare bit of clothing we had and held him close, his small body a furnace against the night's chill. I didn't sleep. I sat with the box of letters in my lap, under a brilliant star-filled sky, and I felt my grandmother's presence all around me. I felt the strength of this land seeping up from the ground into my bones. For the first time, I didn't feel homeless. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The next morning, I walked the 3 miles back into town with Leo in the stroller and the metal box under my arm. I felt like a different person. The self-doubt, the fear that had been my constant companion, was gone. In its place was a quiet, unshakable resolve. My first stop was not the bus station, but the public library. I used their computer to look up Northgate Holdings. They were a massive corporation with a history of aggressive acquisitions and environmental violations. Then I researched mineral rights in the state. My grandmother's paperwork was ironclad. She had done everything right. The rights were mine. My second stop was a payphone. I found the number for Northgate's regional office in the phone book. A slick, cheerful voice answered. I asked for their acquisitions manager, the name listed on the offer letter. When he came on the line, his voice was smooth, condescending. "Ah, Miss Vance, I trust you've come to your senses and are ready to sign the deed transfer." I took a deep breath. "My name is Alara," I said, my voice steady, "and I'm calling to inform you that your offer of $6 for my family's land is rejected. Furthermore, any attempt to contact me again with such an insulting offer will be considered harassment. You are not acquiring my property. Not now, not ever. You know what's under that land, and now, so do I." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. The smoothness evaporated. "Now listen here," he began, his voice turning hard. "That property is worthless. You're a squatter on condemned land. We can have you removed." "I am the legal heir," I said, the words tasting of power. "And I will be defending my grandmother's legacy and my mineral rights with the full force of the law. Have your lawyers contact my lawyer." I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking but my heart soaring. My final stop was Mr. Abernathy's office. He looked up, surprised, as I walked in. "I thought you'd be on a bus by now," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. "I'm not leaving," I said, and I placed the metal box on his huge oak desk. "And I'm not signing." I opened the box and showed him everything: the letters, the journal, the assay reports, the mineral rights deed. I watched his face as he read. The tired resignation in his eyes slowly transformed into a look of disbelief, then dawning respect, and finally, a slow, spreading smile. He looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time. "Eleanor," he whispered, shaking his head in wonder. "You magnificent, stubborn old woman. She did it." He looked back at me. "She always said she was saving the farm for Sarah, or for Sarah's child. I thought she was just hoping." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the sleepy main street. "Northgate has been circling this town for a decade. They've bought out family farms, squeezed people out. They play dirty. This is going to be a fight, Alara." "I know," I said. "Are you with me?" He turned back, and the smile on his face was genuine now, reaching his kind eyes. "Your grandmother paid my family's retainer for 50 years. Sometimes with cash, sometimes with a basket of eggs. As far as I'm concerned, you're paid in full. Of course, I'm with you." It was the beginning of a war. Northgate didn't give up easily. They sent surveyors who tried to trespass. They filed nuisance claims with the county, citing the state of the house. They sent me new offers, first for 10,000, then 50, then 100. Each one went into the trash. Mr. Abernathy handled the legal side, filing injunctions and countersuits. He was a small-town lawyer, but he was sharp, and he knew the local laws better than anyone. He fought for me with a quiet ferocity that I realized was born from a deep respect for my grandmother. The community, which had at first been wary of the stranger in their midst, began to rally. A story in the local paper about the big corporation trying to swindle the last descendant of a town elder helped. People started showing up at the farm. A retired carpenter named George came one day with his sons. "Heard you were having some trouble," he said, tipping his hat. Eleanor gave my wife preserves every year for 30 years. Let's see about that roof. They spent a week patching the roof, securing the structure, making one half of the house waterproof and stable. Another woman, the owner of the local diner, started dropping off hot meals every evening. "You and that boy need to eat," she'd say, refusing any offer of payment. People brought us blankets, clothes for Leo, tools. They didn't just offer help, they offered belonging. They were my grandmother's friends, and they were becoming mine. We lived in a small, clean corner of the house that George and his sons had made safe. We had no electricity and no running water yet, but we had a solid roof, a warm fire in the old fireplace, and a pantry stocked with the kindness of strangers. Every night, I would read another one of my grandmother's letters to my mother. I was piecing together the woman I never knew, and in doing so, I was piecing together myself. She was practical, funny, deeply intelligent, and fiercely loving. The farm came alive through her words. I learned which fields were best for which crops, the names of the birds that visited the big oak tree, the spot by the creek where the wild blackberries grew thickest. She had left me more than mineral rights. She had left me a roadmap to a life. It's been a year now. The legal battle with Northgate is still ongoing, but the tide has turned in our favor. An independent geological survey, paid for by a legal defense fund the town helped me set up, confirmed the existence of a massive, pure aquifer beneath my land, a source of clean water so significant that the state has now declared it a protected resource. Northgate's plans for a water-guzzling development are dead. My grandmother didn't just save the farm, she saved the whole valley. My inheritance isn't just money. It's the clean water that will flow for generations. It's the right to this land, this history. The lawyers say that the water rights will eventually make us wealthy beyond my wildest dreams through leasing agreements with the state. But the truth is, I already feel rich. I'm writing this from my grandmother's desk in a small room that I have repaired and painted myself. Light is streaming through a new window pane, and outside, I can see Leo chasing butterflies in a field of wildflowers. The house is still a work in progress. It's scarred and imperfect, just like me. But it's ours. We are building a life here, nail by nail, memory by memory. I found a box of old seed packets in the barn, and this spring, I planted my grandmother's garden. Tomatoes, squash, beans. I'm learning to coax life from the soil, just as she did. Sometimes, when I'm out there, with my hands in the rich, dark earth, I feel her with me. I feel her pride, her love, her stubborn, beautiful strength. I think about my own mother a lot. I've let go of the anger. I see now that she was trapped in a story she told herself to survive. Her pride, her pain, it built a prison for her. I wish I could have shared this with her. I wish she could have known the truth of her mother's love. But I can do the one thing she never could. I can stop running. I can give my son the one thing I never had: roots. A home is not just four walls and a roof. It's a story. It's the soil under your feet and the history in your bones. It's the knowledge that you belong somewhere. My grandmother's legacy wasn't just a deed hidden under a floorboard. It was the chance for me to reclaim my own story, to build a future on a foundation of truth and love. What was hidden in these walls made me rich, yes, but not in the way most people think. It gave me back a past I never knew I had, and in doing so, it gave me a future I never thought possible. And that's a treasure worth more than any amount of money. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for your place in the world or uncover a difficult family truth, let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. This community is a place for people who understand that the hardest journeys often lead to the most beautiful destinations. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe because we all have a story worth telling.